To major corporations, you're oftentimes just a number, a math calculation, your health and wellness boiled down to a series of dollar amounts in a ledger. The question is whether Pfizer, one of the world's largest companies in the so-called big pharma game, views you in this way as well. So let's explore. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Pfizer became one of the most profitable companies on the planet, moving from an already huge $171 billion market cap on March 23, 2020, just 1 week after then-President Donald Trump announced 15 days to stop the spread, to nearly doubling in size to $333 billion in value on December 13th of 2021. If it isn't painfully obvious by now, Pfizer is a company that profited huge from the COVID-19 crisis, seeing the same amount of market gains that it took McDonald's Restaurants Corporation over 10 years to realize. But there's so much more to the story, and this video explores the history of just some of the lawsuits over their products, the alleged injury and death that some say the company has caused, and the one product that guarantees they remain just as profitable, if not more, with the promise of never being sued over it. From settlements and payouts, lawsuits, and even allegations of secret drug trials leading to the deaths of children, this is a look at the truth behind Pfizer.
Sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Pfizer.
Pfizer. Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
This company is complicated. They have armies of lawyers, and they've paid dozens of settlements. And they have a history of what we're going to have to be careful to navigate. We need to point out that settlements do not mean guilt in the eyes of the law, and allegations are allowed against any person or company. Still, it's hard to unravel the onion presented here. Oh, and fun fact, when I tried using current AI king ChatGPT to get an entire list of all the lawsuits, settlements, court cases on the company, the mighty AI everyone is gushing over gave me a virtual chuckle, telling me only that it would be beyond the scope of even the strongest AI to produce such a list, and it completely refused my query. Undeterred, let's begin in modern times and work our way backwards. Now, in case you only watch mainstream network news and stay completely off of social media, you might have missed the viral undercover video on Pfizer from January of 2023. In this video, a Pfizer executive brags to what he thinks is a date about how his company was considering creating new versions of the sometimes deadly COVID strains in order to create new vaccines for them.
Pfizer ultimately is thinking about mutating COVID?
Well, that is not what we say to the public. No, don't tell anyone this building. You probably shouldn't tell anyone. You probably shouldn't tell anyone. Okay? We're exploring, like, now, you know how the virus keeps mutating? One of the things we're exploring is, like, why don't we just mutate it ourselves so we could preemptively develop new vaccines, right?
Now this opens up a potential Pandora's box. If you've heard of so-called gain-of-function research, you might think that what Pfizer is calling directed evolution sounds strangely familiar. Gain-of-function research, or enhancing viruses to be more potent than nature would let it do on its own, is surprisingly not illegal. And creating enhanced versions of known viruses has been around for a few decades, dating back to the early 2000s. In fact, even though President Obama put an end to federal funding for this in 2014, and that funding ban was then lifted in 2018 during the Trump administration, it was never specifically banned itself, only the act of doing so with public tax dollars. And speaking of funding, you know, it will cost you absolutely nothing to hit the subscribe button and bell. Help us grow this channel from nothing to something special so we can continue to bring you videos just like this. But if the allegations are true and this type of research is what led to COVID-19 in the first place, then what does Pfizer have to gain by conducting their own versions of it? Perhaps a more important question is, what do they have to lose? Have you ever wondered if Pfizer has ever truly faced defeat on a business deal? The answer may shock you. But what exactly happens when a company like Pfizer is hit with a lawsuit? Do they fight it, settle the case, move on? And what if there was a law that prevented them from ever being sued? Well, this is where the history starts to get very interesting. Pfizer has not been immune to the wrath of legal actions. The shadows of the courtrooms hold tales of suits brought against the behemoth, seeking reparations for wrongs alleged to cause injury, and in some cases even death. The three of the largest settlements in the company's history are tales of deceit and wrongdoings that will leave you reeling. The first, a settlement of $2.3 billion in 2009, was brought against Pfizer for promoting a drug known as Bextra for uses not approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The U.S. Justice Department found them guilty of felony violations after learning that the drug, which was pulled off the market for its potential to cause heart problems, strokes, and possibly fatal skin disease, was being marketed off-label. meaning doctors were using the anti-inflammatory medication for things it was never intended for. While off-label use is common, in the case of Bextra, these specific off-label uses were being promoted by a subsidiary of Pfizer, but they were specifically denied these uses by the FDA when Pfizer asked for approval of the drug in the first place. But that's not all. A settlement of up to $1.2 billion in 2012 saw Pfizer paying out over the deaths of thousands of women who took a drug called Prempro to relieve menopause symptoms. And tragically, over 6,000 women died and over 10,000 developed breast cancers. This resulted in a lengthy court battle where it was revealed that Pfizer withheld information that the drug can and did cause a breast cancer risk in anyone taking it. These cases, along with many more like marking the price of life-saving drugs up 1,600% and then bringing the market to price fix them, settlements over drugs like Effexor over birth defects, Eliquis for severe bleeding, and perhaps the most tragic of all, Trovan, which was allegedly given to 200 children in Nigeria in secret, leading to 11 deaths and a $75 million settlement, are all publicly available and sad examples of a company settling time and again to the tune of literally billions of dollars. So if you're wondering how a company can bleed money considering the cost of their legal team and that many settlements, you need to understand how big companies that make potentially dangerous products actually work. This was summed up well in the 1999 film Fight Club, where the character known only as the narrator explains that his job is run like a math formula. If the company he works for calculates it costs more to recall a deadly product than pay lawsuits and settlements, they simply pay lawsuits and settlements when and if any harm to the public happens and the courts have to step in. In the case of Pfizer, how much were those profits versus lawsuits? More on that in a minute, because for a company that creates tangible products like Pfizer, these products themselves are the very same things that lead to settlements. But in 2020, something strange happened.
The virus, today given an official name, COVID-19. It's infected over 43,000 and killed more than 1,000 people, nearly all cases in China.
Pfizer stepped into familiar territory.
My administration provided a total of $14 billion to accelerate vaccine development. We're very hopeful that the FDA will authorize the Pfizer vaccine within days. We've got to get it moving.
And it was chosen by the federal government to receive special emergency authorization for a drug using a technology never fully used on a large-scale population before. This opened up the potential to roll out a product that, at least for a time, the whole world desperately wanted.
90-year-old Margaret Keenan, well, she'll go down in history. She's become the first person in the world to receive the Pfizer vaccine against COVID-19.
She's the first responder who made history as the first American to get the COVID vaccine.
As we mentioned, Pfizer has entered into an agreement with the government. They'll be able to supply an additional 100 million doses of the vaccine under this new agreement.
Something that the vast majority of the population took in desperation, thinking that it would allow them to avoid suffering, stop a pandemic, and allow them to finally get back to normal life. A product that would see Pfizer with contracts not only from healthcare providers, but from entire nation states. And better yet, a product for which they could never be taken to court for in the United States of America.
The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments today about legal protections for vaccine manufacturers. National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, passed by Congress in 1986, established a no-fault system of compensation in such cases. The law set up a special vaccine court to confirm injuries and to award damages accordingly. The goal was to shield drug companies from repeated lawsuits and thereby guarantee steady supplies of vaccine.
That product, which became known as Comirnaty, is the very same mRNA vaccine for COVID-19 that a Pfizer executive was caught on hidden camera talking about in January of 2023. The same vaccine that Pfizer itself is allegedly considering dangerous gain-of-function type research to enhance, possibly to sell boosters to people, all while being protected by a 1986 law prohibiting any and all vaccine manufacturers from liability lawsuits over any and all side effects from any and all vaccines. A product that for a time printed money for the company, for which they have huge contracts with entire nations to deliver, and for which they can never be sued for. So at this point, is Pfizer essentially unstoppable? Well, the answer to that is surprisingly, possibly no. There are indeed some cracks starting to show in the armor of the company. After the Thai princess tragically fell into a coma after receiving a COVID-19 booster, the government there became livid, with reports that the king is on the brink of nullifying its contract with the company to deliver vaccines to the nation. If this does come to pass, it is perhaps a small victory for those looking to slow down the giant corporation, with some hoping it may lead to other nations to reconsider their purchase agreements. At the end of the day, the question we need to ask is whether or not Pfizer views their corporate mission as one to help everyday regular people be healthier, or as one where profits to investors and shareholders take priority. If the company views its mission as profit over people, the numbers are there to make this a reality. Take, for example, Lipitor, a Pfizer drug worth $94.67 billion in profits between 1992 to 2017, or its COVID pill Paxlovid, which sold close to $24 billion in 2022 alone. Is the $7.8 billion paid out over the top 10 Pfizer lawsuits a concern for a company that saw revenues of $81.3 billion in 2021 alone? Pfizer is indeed a polarizing company, one that spends countless billions on research that can help countless billions of people, but also one which is so ingrained in marketing, advertising, and sales, it can appear to be willing to ship products that can harm and be willing to write checks to minimize that damage. Is it morally right to bar lawsuits in the United States against companies making vaccines with newer and different types of technologies never used before? Or are people just doing what they always do? Finding things to be upset over and injustices to tweet about while they sit at their desks at work, looking to get their voices into the conversation. I will leave all these answers up to you, my viewer, so leave me a comment below and tell us what you think the truth is, dark or not.